And welcome back to the Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity. We're talking this hour with author Diane Brandon about intuition and about dreams. So let's start on the intuition side, Diane. When somebody comes to you and they I don't know, these weird things are happening to me, how do you know it's intuition?
Oh, that's a wonderful question, Sam. You know, when I teach intuitive skills to other people, often people attending will say, you know I'm intuitive, I've had experiences, but I don't trust it. How can I learn to trust it?
Right.
I think, and you know this, Sam, intuition is not taught in schools. It's not part of our official culture. And so, we're really brought up to trust what we see and what we hear and what we know through our five, I call them the recognized senses.
Right.
And so people are a little afraid of being ridiculed or being considered strange if they start paying attention to their intuition or listening to it, much less really developing it and learning to do what I call accessing it on demand. So, that we can get those wake-up calls. I think if we have enough experiences where we've gotten intuitive information spontaneously and we haven't listened to it and then we regret not having listened to it, that's a motivator.
I like to say it's we're all afraid to be the first person in the room to make kind of the comment of this strange thing happened to me, because we think everyone's going to look at us like we're nuts. But once we finally do open our mouths, we find that half the people in the room can say, oh, yeah, and I had this happen. Oh, yeah, and I saw this, and oh, I had that. And all of a sudden, we find that we're not so strange or weird after all. That actually most people have had some kind of unexplainable thing, whether it was a premonition or just a knowing, or they saw something that wasn't there, or whatever it happened to be, that it's actually much more common than we believe. It's just everyone's afraid to talk about it because we're all afraid of embarrassing ourselves.
Yes, and that's really, really true. It's so interesting that, so many people hold back from sharing things like that. And it really is true that most people have had experiences, and it is referred to in our mainstream culture. It's called, a hunch. In the corporate world, it's called a hunch, or it's called, some people call it women's intuition.
Right.
But this is a very, very natural human ability, and it is our cultural conditioning that has gotten us to stray from it. But yes, most people experience this spontaneously. And I think we hold ourselves back when we're concerned about what other people will think. And I could go off on a tangent on that one, Sam, about allowing ourselves to be who we really are and daring to be who we really are.
Let's get back to the original question, though. Like you said, it's how can people learn to trust it?
I think one way of learning to trust it, as I said, is kind of the negative approach, and that is by having enough bad experiences when you don't listen to it that you start to give it more credit and you start to trust it and pay attention to it. The other way of doing that is to learn how to access it on demand and have confirmation of the information that you're getting.
Right.
And that's a positive feedback loop that then encourages people.
Right.
And again, this is a natural skill that everybody has innately. It can be developed. You can learn how to access information on demand. The other part of this, Sam, is when you learn to listen to your intuition, get information, whether it's paying attention to it coming to you spontaneously or accessing it on demand, it has huge benefits for us in our lives. And one that I feel is very, very important, I mean, there are other benefits, or a lot of benefits, but one is that it really does help to empower us. It gets us into our inner knowing. It can lead us to think more for ourselves. And for people who doubt themselves, it can really help to boost self-confidence.
Right.
There are other benefits as well. There's spiritual benefits.
Mm-hmm.
It can improve relationships. It can really give us better insight into other people. Obviously, it can help us make decisions.
Right. And, the thing is, I always, when I talk to people about it, I always like to say to them, look, it's a muscle. Think of it like a muscle like any other. If you never train it, if you never use it, go to the gym and lift some weights with it, it's just going to atrophy. It's not going to do any good. So, practice using it on small things, on little things that, you don't really have an emotional stake in, because you might be more likely to get a positive or an accurate response. So I sometimes give people the example of like how when I started developing my intuition, I remember one time I was going to a meeting and I took a subway to get there, and I came out of the subway and I had to walk a few blocks to get to where the place was, and I'd never been there before. And so without looking at like the numbers on the addresses of the buildings, I knew the address of where I was going. I was like, is this on the right side or the left side? Okay, I just closed my eyes and said, right or left? And it was like, left. I'm like, okay, fine. I started walking down the avenue on the left side, thinking that's where the place should be, and it looked like I was probably right. But then when I got to the block where I thought it should have been, there was this huge construction site, and there was no storefronts, no building, and I was like, oh wow, I guess I was wrong. So I crossed the street, and I'm looking on the other side of the street, but I couldn't find it there either until I went a block further, and then I found it diagonally across on the other side of the avenue, which was actually what my intuition had initially told me, but I had doubted myself halfway through.
Yes. And you brought up a very, very important point, Sam, and that has to do with practicing. Number one, yes, it is a muscle, and practice is important. And number two, in initially trying to work with information that's not emotionally based, because one of the biggest pitfalls in getting intuitive information is our own, what I call it, our own personal stuff, our wants, our fears, our mindsets, our beliefs.
Right.
It's very, very important to be able to bypass the personal stuff to get the pure information that's more reliable. So that's a really, really important point with this.
Right, exactly. And sometimes when we start with something new, we want to go for the big things and I want to have some great intuitive flash. But if you haven't spent the time practicing on little things, that's kind of like going to the gym and saying, I'm going to press 250 pounds today. Well, how much have you lifted before? Well, 5. It's maybe you want to step it up a little bit at a time and not go straight to the 250-pound weight. Exactly.
And the important thing, too, is to build up your confidence with this. And you can get confirmation on those little things just like you did.
On our Facebook live stream, but I think we're back now. Right, exactly. It's back.
Good.
But yeah, I mean, exactly. It's we want to make a major decision in our lives intuitively, yet we haven't spent the time to look at little things and to build up our confidence and our trust. Because, right, isn't 90% of really developing our intuition is just trusting it?
Yes. And it's also paying attention to subtleties, because our intuitive voice, I'll call it voice, even though it can come in many different forms, can often be very, very subtle. It's not like we get a neon light in front of us, with the answers. So yeah, it can be very quiet and subtle.
Right, exactly. So it's learning to pay attention, and it can also be, like you said, it comes in different senses. So it's also being a little bit more aware of our bodies, because sometimes we can feel something in our body that can kind of give us an indication of which way to go. But here in the Western cultures, we tend to be very mind focused, and everything's through the mind, and we forget that we also have a body.
That is so true, Sam. And there is even an official term for that now. It's called embodied cognition, where our bodies do perceive. Different parts of our bodies do perceive. We talk about gut feelings. Right. And there is a scientific basis for those that's been found now. We talk about, confirmation bumps. It's been proven, too, that there's a knowing in the heart, the research of Institute of Heart Math. So our bodies, we should never discount our bodies as a vehicle of knowing and information that's also dialoguing with us. Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's not just the mind. The mind is a wonderful thing, but it's not just the mind.
But it's not. It's a wonderful thing, but it's not everything.
Yes.
All right, wonderful. So listen, it's time for us to take another commercial break. When we come back, let's talk a little bit about how you developed your intuition and what kind of surprises sort of showed up along the way. Okay, Diane?
That sounds like a great topic, Sam.
Wonderful. So everybody, please stay tuned. You're listening to the Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, and we'll be right back.